Which leads me to our next portion here is a fireside chat with an extraordinary individual I met the other day, Ajay Madhok. And I'm going to read just a little bit of his personal bio. And the reason why we've got Ajay up here is because, well, I'll read it off here. Ajay is a serial entrepreneur, a growth architect, the general partner for the Angel Acceleration Fund, and is an incredibly perceptive individual. His ability to create frameworks and explain difficult concepts with ease is one of his individual gifts. Having been a part of multiple successful companies in Silicon Valley and structuring high-performing teams, Ajay is a wealth of knowledge, and we are excited to have you here. So let's give a warm welcome for Ajay Madhok.
Thank you for having me. That resume or that CV is his own creation. So you have to take it with a rock of salt.
Awesome. So, we're just going to sit down here, and ultimately we wanted to have a conversation with you guys. We'll take more of a personal approach, and if you guys would give us just some feedback as to what you would find most helpful. But first, before we do that, I want to hear about your personal background in business and share with us a little bit about how you see frameworks and how that is important and how it can be used during a mergers and acquisitions or an M&A transaction.
My personal journey is fairly simple. I'm here today at Angel Studios. It's a TV and movie studio. We have shows like The Chosen, and we did a premiere of His Only Son during Easter. And now we are launching The Sound of Freedom. It's going to premiere on July 4th. We have other shows like Dry Bar Comedy and Turtle Twins and so on. So I run strategy there, and I'm a general partner at the captive fund we got. It's called Angel Acceleration Fund. So that's my current. In the past, I've been at Stanford at MediaX, and one of my interests was nonlinear monetization of media. The story of internet so far has been, if you have commodity content, you monetize through advertising. For example, YouTube, right? If you have premium content, you monetize through subscription, HBO, Netflix, right? So I was interested in figuring out, are there other ways to monetize content? For example, merchandise. That has been part of the playbook for a long time, right? So one of those ideas was crypto, and the idea was, can you create memories? Can you create a relationship between the audience and the art? And that paper was interesting for the angel founders. They said, come work with us. So I joined to do demand shaping, and then the other part of strategy is really unlocking the supply so that you can have more shows go through the system, and we created this captive fund. So this is what I do today. MediaX was my previous, at Stanford was the previous experience. And Stanford has this thing about working with 3 schools. So the other 2 schools were Graduate School of Education and Graduate School of Business. So at GSE, I was part of the Learning Accelerator. And at GSB, one of the projects I did that I was the co-PI for was the new playbook for innovation. And I think that, might be of interest here. The idea is, as Peter said, why are we here? What's the goal, right? So if you are a startup, what's the goal? If you ask me that question, 30 years ago or 20 years ago when I was doing startups, my answer was, hey, I'm lazy, I like a lifestyle, there is no employer who is willing to pay for my lifestyle, so I have to run a business so that I can pay for my lifestyle. So the goal was to support a lifestyle through a venture, right? Now, this doesn't have to be everybody's goal, but it's a good guiding principle. Remembering, why are we doing this, right? You can say, oh, I don't like to work for someone, so I don't want to work for someone for an hour, but I don't mind working for myself for 18 hours a day. So that's okay too, right? So keeping that eye on the goal, it brings you to this question about, nothing is static. So shall I buy another company to get to growth, or shall I sell or merge with someone to get to the outcome I care about, right? So this buy build is a dichotomy. It's a decision that we have to take every day, whether you are buying a washing machine or it's a M&A transaction, right? So I'll be happy to share frameworks or models or how you think about it, but I thought I would frame it as a buy build thing, and what have been the traditional approaches and what's the new evolved approach to think about buy and build.
That sounds great. I would say, just what is your perspective of M&A, and then how do you see it through that buy and build lens? So can you explain a little bit more?
So I think M&A is the new IPO, right? I'm a big fan of single round to exit. Life is short, life is beautiful, and I talk to entrepreneurs and explain that 50% of 100 million is numerically the same as 5% of $1 billion. But getting to a 100 million outcome while owning 50% of the company is a lot more achievable than getting to $1 billion outcome. By the time you get there, you are lucky if you own 5%, and you've lost 7, 8, 10 years of life, right? So, when you start thinking about, a single round to exit, right? You draw the inspiration from, the big boys, what we call PE guys, right? So PE guys, they buy to sell. So they're always thinking about value creation. They see the opportunity that they can create that one-time value and then transact, right? But that brings you to the basic framework. M&A has to create new value. 1 + 1 has to be 3 or more, right? So unless that statement is true, right, it's not worth doing the M&A. So the first principle is there an opportunity to create new value by combining the resources, the foundational assets, whether it is market reach or product or capabilities or audience base, in a combined way, whether this combined resources will create new value or disproportionate value, non-linear value, than doing it independently. The second rule in the framework is this value, simply combining resources won't come through. Do we have a plan to orchestrate to get there in a meaningful way? That we can define a plan that both parties can agree on and define metrics to say this is how we're going to create the new value. Orchestration is important because it doesn't happen on its own. And third is, how do you incentivize the two parties coming together to get the benefit of that new value? So is that 1 + 1 = 3 based on 1.4 + 1.6? What is your contribution? How do you measure it, right? So if that thought has gone into the M&A, calculus, then the M&A is successful. So these are three basic principles for any M&A transaction.
Share with us a little bit more about the orchestration portion. So I said, share with us a little bit more about the orchestration and what that looks like in a microscope. So how would you go through the process of developing a stronger relationship with both sides of the businesses?
So to give you an example, when a big company, says, okay, the grand challenge that I have is how do I stay relevant to the next generation of customers? I'm relevant to my current customers. That's why they are there. But how do I stay relevant to my next generation of customers? So if you ask, for example, Adobe, they said, look, we'll buy Figma. and they paid 20 billion. And 20 billion is an artificial number. So 20 billion was the number that the CFO computed that the market could bear, right? So it wasn't based on any multiple math. It wasn't based on trailing revenue. It wasn't based on the potential value of Figma. It was just the price they could pay without taking a haircut in the market. So it was very critical for them to buy Figma because Figma is becoming the center of gravity for design, right? So I'm giving this example because it illustrates that, the acquiring company is not saying, here is what we can do for you, Mr. Figma, Mr. Small Company. It is saying, I'm trying to find out what can this small company do for me. So the roles have reversed. Why? Because traditional M&A is not working. It has three problems. First problem is that when you are not plugged into the ecosystem, you can't separate the spinners from the winners, right? In any industry, there are 99 spinners for a single winner. So if you buy too early or invest too early, statistically, you are investing in a spinner. If you wait for the market to announce a winner, it's too expensive. Like you saw with, the Adobe acquisition of Figma, it's too expensive, right? They had no choice, right? So that's one reason, M&A is difficult because you're not plugged into the ecosystem. The second reason the traditional M&A is not working is because this value creation piece, the orchestration piece, is left to post-merger. So you see values, for example, Chris was saying, okay, there is, I'm doing an asset purchase. It could be, a stock-only deal, right? Where you're saying, okay, it could be structured as, a value deal or a shares deal. What that means is, when you shake hands, you're saying it is 20 billion on the current market price, right? So here is the number of shares. So when you do it based on number of shares, right, then the seller is taking the risk. When you do it on the value, basis, then the buyer is taking the risk. But all that financial engineering is not really thinking about how can we create the new value. So orchestration is really about solving that problem. It's saying, look, the reason we are coming together is because we can create this new value that we couldn't create independently, right? So identifying that and having a plan to incentivize both parties to say that's the goal, right? That's what orchestration is about. And in Adobe's plan, they're saying we will give in to Figma to be the orchestrator. Because design used to be, a designer's thing where, you sat alone and you did something and then you hand it off, right? Today, in product design, whether it is software or industrial product, it's a collaboration, which is one of the themes of the conference, right? It is collaborative. So who is the orchestrator? It is the toolkit which is distributing the work, which is coordinating the work. And that's why Figma is, that center of gravity, right? So it's an example of orchestration.
Is there a framework that you like to use for team orchestration?
I mean, there are many frameworks. My favorite framework, which I have used consistently, and it is evolving, is a framework where you make the team believe that they actually own the company. And so how do you make someone believe that they own the company, right? So you have to align incentives, right? So coming back to why current M&A is so difficult is because of those three reasons, because I enumerated the three reasons. So you think, okay, let me just buy a startup because they're just the opposite, right? So startups are successful because they are able to enlist and align people behind one cause, right? It is the smallest number of people, who are willing to wear that, T-shirt to say, this is what I stand for. That's my stake in the ground, right? So you can only do that, right, through, this commonality, which is, in some sense, purpose. But purpose is then rewarded in terms of equity. And purpose is also, and purpose and equity, the third piece of the triangulation is really, taking ideas from everyone and saying, like Peter was saying, not if, but when. So when this product feature becomes available, what difference will it make? So does it create value for the business? How does it create value for the end user? How does it create value for all the other stakeholders? So that's the triangulation framework, where there is a common purpose, there is common ownership, and the ability to look at everybody's ideas and objectively measuring which creates the most value. Because as a company, no matter how large, you will always have limited resources and more ideas. So a simple framework where priority is value divided by effort. Anything that creates more value and less effort is priority. So aligning people on that. So these three things is the framework. So if you are on the sell side, let's say you're a smaller company and you think that I started this company for a lifestyle, and my lifestyle is getting compromised because I'm working more hours than I envisioned, right? So you think, do I have a stake in the ground for someone? Can I create more value for someone because they have a foundational asset that I don't have? So for these startups, it is really getting to that point. We're saying it's not serving my lifestyle purpose. So it's not a number. It's not a financial number. It is not a number of users. It's not a number of, it's not a margins or a profit number. It is really saying, hey, I started this company to have a lifestyle, right? Am I still enjoying that lifestyle? Because that's my goal, right? Why do this, right? Alexander, when he went towards the east, he met Diogenes, right? A saint, and Diogenes asks, hey, Alexander, where are you going? He said, I'm going to conquer the world. He said, for what? He said, so that I can sleep in peace. He said, what is stopping you from sleeping in peace today, right? So you have to self-introspect. You have to be contemplative about, why am I doing this? So if it is for a lifestyle, then is it rewarding me to have that lifestyle? So if you think it is not, then you want to exit. And the other driving force is, single round to exit is much better because it gives you the learning from one exit, and then you can choose to do another venture and another venture and another venture instead of building it to $1 billion, because it requires different skill set. 0 to 1 is very different skill set than 4 to 10, right? And the chasm of 2 to 4 is you prove outcomes, you verify outcomes, you reconfirm outcomes, and then you start repeating outcomes. So once you are at that stage where you are repeating outcomes, you are worthy, you are M&A worthy. So this is the story from the sell side. The buy side story is, organic growth is hard, right? I want to look at a framework which is, what is the opportunity, the market potential, for my product, my industry, and what is my market share? So if you were just to do a 2x2, that's a framework, right? So if there is, if I have, a market share which is suboptimal, right? But the market is growing, then you want to acquire. That's an example, right? So when you plot the opportunities on that 2x2, it gives you the answer. So the preference is that, you do an M&A where if those 3 rules are met, that there is in collaboration, in this merger, there is new value potential. 2, that there is a plan that we can orchestrate and get to that new value. We can take that risk out. And 3, we have the incentives so that that risk that we took out gets rewarded, that both parties will work towards that orchestration. If those 3 rules are met, it makes sense to buy and not wait for organic growth. Organic growth is hard, takes too long, right? Does that answer?
I wanted to ask you, we'll do one last question here, and then we'll do some question and answer for you guys with Ajay here. Share with us a little bit about the examples of your quadrants. I know we had talked about this before, but high growth, low organic, or other forms of growth. Could you share a little bit more about those 4 quadrants?
So imagine the x-axis as, market share, low to high. And the y-axis as, the potential value of that market. Low growth to high growth. So take an example, generative AI, it's talk of the town today, it's buzz, right? So it has high potential value, right? On the other hand, if you look at, for example, an industry like, furniture, right? It is not, a high growth industry. There is nothing new under the sun when it comes to furniture. I'm just making this up. It may not be the best example. But you are plotting high growth, low growth versus high growth, and you're plotting market share, your current market share from low to high, right? So what you want to be is, you want to be in the top right quadrant, which means you have a higher market share in a high growth market. That's the goal of strategy, right? So now you want to look at what are the opportunities. Can I get there by spending enough money to acquire customers? So for example, you can buy revenue. You can acquire companies, right, that have customers, and now you have a bigger company. Oracle, as an example, okay, they don't do any new innovation. There is no innovation from Oracle in the last 30 years. What is their model? They say, look, let somebody else, innovate and get enterprise customers. So if the lifetime value of the enterprise customers put together, right, is interesting, we'll just go and acquire them, right? And then we will sell them, these maintenance contracts. So Oracle is one of the most stable, stocks on the stock market, right? And they have this strategy where, they're always acquiring and they're not taking the risk of R&D. They have the lowest R&D among big tech, right? So that's an example. Okay. On the other hand, if you look at this Adobe acquisition, right? It was need driven. It was situational. Adobe was sitting on a high because the designers loved it, loved the product, right? And then they suddenly realized how we create new products has changed. The role of design has changed, right? And Figma was orchestrating that. Then they said, okay, what is the most we can pay without taking a haircut? And they got that.
Do you want to elaborate on anything else?
The only other thing I would like to say is that, mid-sized companies or even big companies think that they can do it internally. So internal R&D has been part of their toolkit, right? But internal R&D is also challenged today because, one, they have staffing difficulties. Young people, the next generation of talent wants to work for a small company and not for a big company. They want to either be creating a new startup or working for a startup. They don't like to go work for a big bank or a big company. So they have resourcing difficulties. Second, the process, slows down the pace of innovation in a big company, right? And 3, it is the incentives are not aligned. Because it's a meritocracy, there are bands, and you have titles, and titles come with entitlements, and so on. So it's a system where incentives are not aligned. So therefore, internal R&D, the other weapon, is also not working that well. M&A is not working that well. So the only point I'm making is we should always try and think as a big company or as a mid-sized company. Are there alternatives to internal R&D? Are there alternatives to M&A, right? And there are, once you start thinking about the end goal and saying what is the accelerated path to that goal, right? Then these opportunities emerge, right? So internal R&D is often overlooked.
We have a question right over here.
So just to clarify, are you saying what are the advantages of building a startup versus acquiring? So the advantage of a startup is that you solve the resourcing difficulty. You attract the best talent. You pay them in dreams and ramen noodles. Okay. and you can create a lot of new value at rocket speed, right? That's why you do startups. That's why the startup ecosystem is so powerful, right? Now the advantage from the buy side is really saying M&A might be my option because my internal R&D can't compete with a startup. In the past, I could just compete with a startup through internal R&D, but I just explained that internal R&D has resourcing difficulties, process slows things down, incentives are not aligned, right? So therefore, I need to start looking at startups. The difficulty there is, if you're not plugged into the ecosystem, you can't separate these spinners from the winners, right? So it's really, about your ability to get plugged into the ecosystem so that you have this opportunity to figure out how do I create this new value. And one framework there is not thinking about what can the startup do for me, it's the other way. What can I do for the startup? Is there a foundational asset? For example, my customer base, for example, my data, my insights, my relationships, my supply side network, my demand side network. Is there a resource? Is there an asset that I can give to the startup that will give the startup an inimitable differentiation? So if that happens, which means if there are 5 other startups competing for the same business, but because I've given the foundational asset to this one startup, there is an advantage. Therefore, you can create new value faster, right? So, I'm a big startup advocate, and like I said, if I were to summarize, single round to exit, right? Combined value creation, and startup as the growth engine, and these 3 things put together tells you that M&A is the new IPO, right? So the exit opportunity is really the M&A. It's not really taking it to an IPO, right? So far, it's been organic growth, right? So as strategy, as someone who runs strategy, any consumer business has these 2 parts. One is shaping demand. How might you bring more audiences to your shows, right? And the other part is the supply side. How might you unlock more shows to go through your platform? We're a distribution platform, so the more shows that come through, right, you want to improve the quality of inputs. So what we have been focused on, so far, has been the demand shaping side, right? So, we started with, dry bar comedy, and, it was a phygital experiment. So we do the physical show, we record it and make it available digitally. So that, has created the largest comedy library, right? And it's a great, mechanism to attract new customers because these are all shorts, right? You don't have to watch a comedy show end to end, right? So, we can divide and create these shorts. It's called filler content. But like any other business, value is on the sides. So either on shorts or on hits. Anything in the middle doesn't capture the value. So that has been one demand shaping strategy, right? Second demand shaping strategy has been, collectible scenes, and I can talk more about it. But so far the journey has been, how might we bring more audiences, right? And we have created, a lot of innovative ways of doing it. On the supply side, the strategy has been, we must take skin in the game. So we started this captive fund, Angel Acceleration Fund, where we are investing in shows. We are taking the lead. And we are saying, okay, we'll make you successful because we are your business partners. So we have the distribution side. Now we become their business partners and take them along. So now you can think of that as investments that we are making, right, in a collection of startups. So each venture, each show is like a startup venture.